The Hiding Place. Chapter 2. Full Table. I was 6 years old. Betsy stood me in front of the mirror and helped me dress for my first day of school. 8-year-old Noli and I shared the bedroom at the top of the beach. She and I were almost the same age and played together, but Betsy, at 13, seemed almost an adult to me. She had always seemed older because she could not run and roughhouse the way other children did. Betsy had been born with pernicious anemia. While the rest of us played tag or had skate races down frozen canals in winter, she did dull things like embroidery. There were many living at the beach. Tante Yance, Mama's older sister, had moved in with us to spend, as she put it, what few days remained to me, though she was not very old. The house was already crowded by the earlier arrivals of Mama's other two sisters, Tante Bep and Tante Anna. Tante Yance took the 2 second-story rooms of the front house. In the first room, she wrote the Christian tracts for which she was known all over Holland, and in the second received the well-to-do ladies who supported this work. For sleep, she partitioned off a cubicle just large enough to hold a bed. Above Tante Yance's 2 rooms were 4 small rooms. The first one was Tante Bep's. Behind it, strung like railroad compartments off a narrow aisle, were Tante Anna's, Betsy's, and our brother Willem's. 5 steps up from these rooms, in the second house behind, was Noli's and my small room. Beneath us was Mama and Father's room, and beneath there's the dining room with the kitchen off to the side. As I descended the steep stairs that morning when I was 6, on my first day of school, I had an awful feeling. How was I to leave this house above the watch shop, leave Mama and Father and the aunts, leave behind everything that was certain and well-loved? The school was only a block and a half away, and Noli had gone there 2 years without difficulty. But Noli was different from me. She was pretty and well-behaved. As I rounded the final curve of the stairway, the solution came to me, so clear and simple that I laughed out loud. I just would not go to school. I would stay here and help Tante Anna with the cooking, Mama would teach me to read, and I would never go into that strange building at all. Relief flooded me. Tante Bep, with her disapproving scowl, was the oldest of the aunts and the one we children liked least. For 30 years, she had worked as a governess in wealthy families, and she continually compared our behavior with that of the youngsters she was used to. It was 8:12. Breakfast had already begun. 2 minutes late, cried Willem triumphantly. The Waller children were never late, said Tante Bep. But they're here, said Father. And the room is brighter. We sisters took our seats. I looked around the table trying to decide which adult would be most enthusiastic about my decision to stay at home. Father put a high importance on education. He had had to stop school to go to work in the watch shop, and though he had taught himself history, theology, and literature in 5 languages, he always regretted the missed schooling. He would want me to go, and whatever Father wanted, Mama wanted. Tante Anna? She had often told me she could not manage without me to run errands up and down the steep stairs. Since Mama was not strong, Tante Anna did the housework for our family of 9. She was the youngest of the 4 sisters, with a spirit as generous as Mama's. Yes, she would be my ally. A deep dramatic intake of breath made us all look up. Tante Yance was standing in the kitchen doorway, a glass of liquid in her hand. She closed her eyes, lifted the glass to her lips, and drained it down. Then, with a sigh, she sat down. And yet, she said, as though we had been discussing the subject, what do doctors know? What good does anything do when one's day arrives? I glanced round the table. No one was smiling. Tante Yance's preoccupation with death might have been funny, but it wasn't. Young as I was, I knew that fear is never funny. And yet, Yance, Father remonstrated gently, medicine has prolonged many a life. Fortunately, the shop people arrived and Father took down the Bible from its shelf. He put on his rimless spectacles and began to read, Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Thou art my hiding place and my shield. I hope in thy word. What kind of hiding place? I wondered idly. What was there to hide from? When at last Father closed the big volume, Noli, Willem, and Betsy were on their feet. Next minute they raced down the stairs and out the alley door. The shop workers left for work. Only then did the 5 adults notice me still seated at the table. "Corrie," cried Mama. "Have you forgotten you're a big girl now? Today you go to school too." "I'm not going." There was a startled silence, broken by everybody at once. "When I was a girl," Tante Yance began. Mrs. Waller's children from Tante BP. But Father's deep voice drowned them out. "Of course she's not going alone. Noli forgot to wait, that's all. Corrie is going with me." He wrapped my hand in his and led me from the room. There was a railing along the bottom 5 steps. I grabbed it with my free hand and held on. Skilled watchmaker's fingers closed over mine and gently unwound them. Howling and struggling, I was led away from the world I knew into a bigger, stranger one. Mondays, Father took the train to Amsterdam to get the correct time from the Naval Observatory, and I would go with him. The train trip to Amsterdam was a wonderful ride. The close-wedged buildings of Haarlem gave way to the flat Dutch farmland stretching to the horizon, ruler-straight canals sweeping past the window. Then came Amsterdam, with its strange streets and canals. Father always arrived a couple of hours early in order to visit the wholesalers who supplied him with watches and parts. Many of these were Jews, and these were the visits we both liked best. After a brief discussion of business, Father would draw a small Bible from his traveling case. The wholesaler, whose beard would be even longer than Father's, would snatch a book or a scroll out of a drawer and clap a prayer cap onto his head. And then the two of them would be off, arguing, comparing, interrupting, contradicting, reveling in each other's company. Just when I decided that this time I had been forgotten, the wholesaler would catch sight of me and strike his forehead with the heel of his hand. "A guest in my gates, and I have offered her no refreshment." Springing up, he would rummage into cupboards, and before long I would be holding on my lap a plate of the most delicious treats in the world, honey cakes and date cakes, and a kind of confection of nuts, fruits, and sugar. By 5 minutes before noon, we were back at the train station, standing at a point on the platform with a good view of the tower of the Naval Observatory. On the top of the tower, where it could be seen by ships in the harbor, was a tall shaft with 2 movable arms. At the stroke of 12 o'clock noon each day, the arms dropped. Father would stand at his vantage point on the platform, holding his pocket watch. There. Now he could carry home the correct time, accurate to the second. On the train trip home, we talked about different things as the years passed. Betsy's graduation from school in spite of the months missed with illness. Whether Willem would get the scholarship that would let him go on to the university. Betsy starting work as Father's bookkeeper in the shop. Sometimes I would bring up things that were troubling me. I treasured those times with Father. I followed Mama and Noli up a dark flight of stairs where cobwebs clutched at our hair. We were going to see one of the poor families in the neighborhood whom Mama had adopted. Mama was always cooking up nourishing soups for forgotten old men and pale young mothers on days, that is, when she herself was strong enough to stand at the stove. The night before, a baby had died, and with a basket of fresh bread, Mama was making a call on the family. She toiled up the stairs, stopping often for breath. At the top, a door opened. Mama went at once to the young mother, but I stood frozen on the threshold. To the right of the door, still in the crib, was the baby. I stared at the tiny, unmoving form with my heart thudding strangely against my ribs. For a while, curiosity and terror struggled in me. At last, I put one finger on the small hand. It was cold. For all Tante Yance talk about it, death had been only a word. Now I knew that it could really happen, if to the baby, then to Mama, to Father, to Betsy. That night, still shivering with that cold, I followed Noli to our room and crept into bed beside her. At last we heard Father's footsteps. It was the best moment when he came up to tuck us in. We never fell asleep until he had arranged the blankets in his special way and laid his hand for a moment on each head. That night as he stepped through the door, I burst into tears. "You can't die," I sobbed. "You can't." "We went to see Mrs. Hoog," Noli explained. Father sat down on the edge of the narrow bed. "Corrie," he began gently, "when you and I go to Amsterdam, when do I give you your ticket?" I considered this. "Just before we get on the train." "Exactly. And our wise Father in heaven knows when we're going to need things, too." Don't run ahead of him, Corrie. When the time comes that some of us will have to die, you will look into your heart and find the strength you need just in time.